Okay, as we start chapter 2, we will be starting by reviewing some solving equations of maybe tougher quadratics. Like our first learning target here says I can solve a quadratic equation using completing the square in the square root method. And then notice it also says I can solve a quad equation using the quad formula. It's all part of the big picture. Earlier in chapter 1, we were solving quadratic equations quite often. They would come up, so we took a day to review solving quad equations by factoring. And they look like this. I gave you a handout one day, and I gave you a mix of solving by factoring. So 25, 26 is GCF. Here we factored these into two binomials. We reviewed this. We also went over square root method. Okay, take the square root of both sides when possible. That's an easy way to solve quadratics. We'd say x equals plus or minus 7. Okay, 37, we divide by 3 first before we do that. All right, so we covered these two methods and a lot of variations of those, but we waited on some of these other methods until we needed them. Completing the square is one that we're going to cover today, and then quad formula. We can actually use the quadratic formula for any quadratic equation, but usually factoring is just quicker and easier, and square root method is very quick and easy, so we don't use the quad formula unless we typically need it. All right, so I want to start off by just showing you this list so you understand that it's just part of this big picture of solving quad equations. As a matter of fact, when I give you your assignment today, I'm going to give you a couple of these review problems too that are not in our notes today, in your notes from chapter 1. Okay, making sure you can still use these skills when needed. Okay. All right, so here we go. So another reason too why we're completing the square, it's also a good way to identify the vertex, which you may recall from algebra 2. Because when I can complete the square and make it look like this, it's really easy to find the vertex. So that will lead right into tomorrow's notes in 2.1 as well. All right, so I can solve a quad equation by using completing the square. Here's the success criteria I want you to write down. All right, first step is you want to move C to the other side. Sometimes it might not be already there, and sometimes it will be. But by the C, I mean the constant term of the quadratic. So move C to the other side is the first step. Okay. Write this down in the space provided. We actually did this too with the circle problems. Remember when we did this? We had x quantities and y quantities. We took half of b and squared it, got that number, added it to both sides. We're going to do a very similar thing with these quadratics here. So half of b, add it to both sides, and then we're on to step 3. Step 3 says factor and express as a quantity squared. And once we're to that step, it lends itself very well to finishing it with the square root method. Square root both sides and solve the problem. Okay, go ahead and pause it to give you time to write that down. All right, I'll walk you right through these steps now on example 1. All right, so the constant term needs to be moved to the other side. We get it out of the way. So it's minus 12. We want to add 12 to both sides. All right, now this is where I start the completing the square process. I take half of b, so I put this off to the side here. This is the b over 2 squared. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 squared equals 1. So that's the number I need to add now to both sides. Keeping the equation balanced. I kind of put check marks to make sure I accounted for that. Okay, so that's step 1 and 2. Step 3 up there says to now factor it and express as a quantity squared. Should be pretty easy to factor this now. We're looking for factors of 1 that add up to 2. You only have one option, right? 1 times 1, and it happens to add up to 2. So we can factor it like that. Remember, sometimes we split the middle term and factor by grouping, but when a is 1, we can use this shortcut. And then I can express that as quantity squared. So now I have x plus 1 quantity squared equals 13. Okay, now we can use the square root method. All right, I've got something squared, so I'm going to square root both sides. Maybe you want to write it in here if you want to, or I just put in words since it might look too messy in your notes. Square root both sides. Okay, so I take square root of both sides. I get x plus 1 on the left. And on the right side, I'm going to have plus or minus square root of 13. Don't forget the plus or minus. Remember, if I took a real basic square root method and x squared equals 25 for you, we got to say x equals 5 and negative 5 because negative 5 squared is 25. So when you take the square root, do the plus or minus. All right, let's just keep it in radical form for now. We don't need to get a decimal answer. So now I just subtract the 1 to finish solving for x. And we get this. Okay. You could write it this way as well. I guess it doesn't really matter. You could put plus or minus square root of 13 minus 1. That's fine. Typically, they'll write it in that order, though. You check in the back, okay? Okay, let's see if we can get number 2 going. I'll give you about a minute to get ahead of me and see if you can get it set up and organized. Okay, here it is. Step 1, move C to the other side. Step 2, take half of negative 4. It's negative 2. Square it to get positive 4. Add it to both sides. Okay, and then try to factor it. Factors of 4. Add up to negative 4 have to be negative 2 and negative 2. So x minus 2 quantity squared. Now we're ready to use the square root. So square root both sides to get x minus 2 on the left, plus or minus square root of 2 on the right. Okay, add 2. There's the answer. Okay, now when a is not 1 on 3 and 4, we've got other ways to find the vertex and solve the problem using the quad formula. So that's what we're going to do there. So I'm going to give you one more problem to try all on your own. A little difference. So you can cross those out and just replace 3 with this one right here. Okay, last one to do on this side. X squared minus 8x equals 9. Okay. Try it. All right, there it is. C term's already moved over, so we're ready to take half of b and square right now in step 2. So x minus 4 quantity squared is how we can factor that. Square root both sides to get x minus 4, square root here to get plus or minus 5. So now this one happened to have a perfect square root, so here's your 2 solutions once you add 4. Okay, here's how you figure that out. We just think, all right, well, 5 plus 4, and then you got to make the 5 negative, and negative 5 plus 4. We consider both of those situations to get 9, and this one gives me negative 1. Okay? 9 and negative 1. Okay, moving on to the next page, we can use the discriminant to determine if the quadratic has real solutions or not, and then solving quad equations using the quad formula. Okay? Basically, we'll refer to this table as we're working through it, but if we know what's under the radical, this expression has a name called the discriminant. If we know if it's positive, we know there's going to be 2 real solutions every time. If it's equal to 0, it has 1, and when it's negative, it has 2 non-real solutions. So we'll see that unfold as we work through these. Okay, one thing I definitely want you to write down, whenever we're trying to solve quadratic equations, whether we're factoring or the quad formula, we always want to try to keep a positive. Write that in there. Try to keep a positive. Don't even try, just do it, because it's easy to do. Okay, so I just mean this term in front of x squared, right? We want to keep that positive. So simply put, if I had negative 2x squared plus 6x equals 0, you can make a positive. You can multiply everything by negative 1, or you just move them to the right. I can add the 2x squared and subtract the 6x to both sides and get this. Okay, so it's pretty easy to make a positive, but it's also going to help you in solving quadratic equations, okay? Okay, so let's take a look at the first example. Solve the quadratic equation using the quad formula. Okay, it has to be in the standard form first. It has to be set equal to 0. So that 10x is out of place. You got to move it over. Write that down first. Notice I didn't move the terms to the right. That'd make a negative. Moving it to the left kept this a positive 1. All right, but if I forget that step, you're going to have a b value that's positive 10. It should be negative 10. Some students like to take the step and do this and write down the a, b's, and c's to the quad formula. All right, so now just a matter of putting things in the right spot and then simplifying it correctly. Okay, so here we go. Using the quad formula up above. Okay, it says negative b first. So negative b plus or minus the square roots. And this is what's called the discriminant, right? The b squared minus 4ac. Sorry, I had an extra set of parentheses. That's why I scribbled out there, so you can ignore that part. Always put b in parentheses, though, the negative 10 squared. If you don't and you go to your calculator, mistakes are made. You'll have negative 100 instead of positive 100. All right, so minus 4. Here's my a. Here's my c. And then all of this is over 2a. All right, it looks like a lot on the first step. The quad formula usually does, but after one step of simplifying it, it cleans itself up right away. Okay, so I would recommend writing that discriminant in there exactly the way you see it on paper, just like that. Okay, I already have that demonstrated for you. So there it is. Here's what happens if you don't put b in parentheses. That's a pretty major mistake. I'm off by 200 units. Put that in parentheses so you don't make that mistake, okay? 0 is the correct answer. All right, so like I said, looks big, intimidating, but once you clean up the negative b, we got 10. This is 0, and obviously the 2 times a is 2 down here. All right, so I got 0. Square root of 0 is 0. So I do 10 plus 0, I get 10 divided by 2. And 10 minus 0 is 10 divided by 2. Okay, so scenario 2 happened, where we have the discriminant, it was equal to 0, and I get one real solution. Okay, and that's all we have. It's just 5. All right, go ahead and try to get 6 set up, and if you need help simplifying, I'll help you. But let's go ahead and do 6, and then we'll wrap it up with a 7 and an 8 as well. All right, so this one had a perfect square root of 25. So now you take both of those scenarios, 3 plus the 5 to get 8. 8 over 4 is 2, and then 3 minus the 5 is negative 2. Over 4, so that's negative 1/2. Okay, so 2 and negative 1/2. 2 solutions. That happens when the discriminant is positive. Okay, number 7, let's try this one. Go ahead and get that going, and then I'm going to give you a number 8 as well. Why don't you try both of these, and I'll give you feedback after the break. This one here, move that 3x over, and then try number 8 as well. Okay, 7 worked out to have a negative number under the radical. So when that happens, we say 2 non-real solutions. Okay, in 2.4, we'll go on to simplify it and say I squared 151. So if we did that, fine. But for now, all you got to do is stop and say non-real solutions. Okay. All right, and here's the answer to 8. Square root of 24 can be simplified. So square root of 24 has 4 times 6 underneath here. So square root of 4 comes out. It's 2 square root of 6. So I put that in right here now. And then you just break this apart to reduce it. The 8's being divided by 4, and that's being divided by 4. Okay. And then 8 over 4 is 2, and then this 2/4 is 1/2. Okay, now these problems are in the back. A means appendix. Starts off with 3 review problems, and then today's work starts with 43 through 61. So the first 3 are review. The red problems can be You can scan the QR code and you have video examples of those, okay? Solutions are on page